Chapter 3. A large part of Tokyo now resembled a sea of smoke and fire. This was due in large part to three Godzillas firing their respective versions of the atomic ray at one another, two orange and one blue. All three carved through buildings like thieves through wheat, and set fire to anything that did not outright collapse. In the center of the inferno, the survivor of the Dimension Tide fought a war on two fronts, with Orga's Bane behind him and Kiru's nemesis in front of him. He was forced to think quickly as they charged. As soon as Godzilla 2000 stepped into range, a prehensile tail wrapped around his leg and pulled, toppling him and buying the tail's owner a moment to plan. However, the plan was simple: charge forward to fight the silver-spiked rival. As they grappled, the differences between them became clear to the unlucky few still trapped in the city to watch such a spectacle. Though the same height and weight, the scarred one had a shorter tail and a bulkier body. However, that bulk did not seem to aid him, as he was slightly slower than his enemy, who scratched at the scar with his claws, instinctively recognizing it as a weak point. But when discussing kaijus, especially Gojirahkiins, weak is a relative term. As the jade-scaled monster went in for a bite, he turned his body to present his better-shouldered, armored shoulder. Though painful, the bite did no real damage there, and it brought him a moment to charge his primary weapon. Seeing his strategy, his foe released him and started charging its own atomic ray. But the Grey Titan's weapon was faster to charge, and he fired it point blank at his rival's neck, toppling him. Glowing orange spines dug into the ground, impaling and melting it in equal measure as the owner released a strangled groan and tried to roll onto his belly so that he could rise. His opponent took a cautious step forward and began charging another blast. For better or worse, Godzilla 2000 chose that moment to rise and fire his own atomic ray, hoping to catch the one that had shot him in the face off guard. It simply was not meant to be, as a blue atomic ray immediately flew to intercept it. Blue and orange beams met in the middle, directly over the third, still dazed Godzilla. But as the beams contested, the bowl of energy between them steadily grew, until it touched the still crackling spikes, the rising Godzilla. There was no way it could end than in a tremendous explosion of nuclear energy. The radiation did not harm any of them in the least. Indeed, it may well have given them all a small boost, but the sheer force released by the explosion did more than enough damage on its own. Such was the power of the shockwave that much of the smoke had been dispersed, most of the fires extinguished, and all of the surviving buildings for several kilometers completely leveled. Two Godzillas rose and roared at each other. There were no signs of the third, merely a crater where it had been, and a disturbed earth where apparently even the pavement had been blasted away. Godzilla 2000 charged his only standing rival, the scarred Godzilla, who rushed to meet him. The Permian predator bit down on the back of his rival's head, making it yelp. The younger king had powers that nature had never intended. He had seen its scratches and bite mark ceiling, and felt the power of its atomic ray. But if there was one thing that 250 million years worth of life had taught him, it was that brain injuries do not regenerate. He would crush these mutant skulls in his jaw and end it quickly. A bite to the gills distracted him, and he disengaged with a howl of pain. At least he would crush the mutant skull if the other one would give him a moment's respite. He had quickly discovered that as powerful as the bulkier of his foes was at a distance, he lacked experience in claw-to-claw combat and had exploited it. A pity that the same could not be said of the smaller mutant. It was the same height as the other one, but slimmer, and compensated for a lack of weight with sheer aggression and bestial cunning. He had quickly determined that his skills were a weak point and began targeting them. His only saving grace was that the third was equally aggressive to the both of them. It either did not know or care that the alpha predator had determined its weaknesses, and lashed out with a single-minded rage at whichever of them was closest to it. But what the Godzilla of the Cold War era lacked in strategy, it made up for in savagery and an apparent vast well of nuclear energy. He was not afraid in the least of firing his beam at point blank, even when the ensuing explosion could potentially hurt him just as much. He seemed fully aware that few things could harm him, and much of what did could regenerate. True to form, the smaller mutant had tackled the other of its feats, and was now rapidly punching the larger one, knocking out the teeth with the sheer force of each punch. But after a few half-hearted attempts to bite the offending fist, the larger one settled for firing an atomic ray at its attacker and maintaining the blast until pain forced the attacker to back away long enough for him to return to his feet. He did not stay on his feet long. Not 1 second had passed when the tail of the eldest Godzilla slammed into his guts with all the force he could muster. Such was the power of the blow that even the predator felt a pair of the mutant's ribs break. That, he was for sure, would tax the creature's unnatural healing factor. He waited just long enough to see it fall backward and howl in agony before charging the smaller mutation. He would give credit where it was due. The smaller creature showed no fear whatsoever, running towards him as fast as it could. It even leaped at him, perhaps thinking to take him by surprise. With speed the mutant had not anticipated, the eldest Godzilla caught him by the throat with one hand and began pushing him backwards. He resisted for a moment by bracing his tail against the ground, but the alpha predator began using a second claw, and any hope of holding him back was lost. The premium Godzilla did not normally go out of his way to destroy the human's nest. For all their faults, they were part of the world as well. But today, he could not afford such consideration. He slammed the mutant through buildings after buildings, hoping to wear down its tough hide. He would have kept going, but an alien energy suddenly surged through his prey's body, burning him and forcing him to drop it. No matter. The prey was on the ground now, and he could work with that. The battle between the hero and demon was quickly becoming a battle of speed against raw power. The heroic Godzilla would use the villain's every move against him, slamming his face and body through buildings. If not for his thick hide, he would be covered in sharp debris and bruises. But for all his skills, the champion was not perfect. One of his arms was covered in blood from a bite he'd been unable to avoid. But even in that, he had shown himself to be full of surprises, using his other hand to force open his foe's jaws and extricating himself. Now as the fight raged on, the possessed Godzilla aimed a bite at his foe's neck. But his more agile rival deftly ducked and actually took the opportunity to headbutt his neck. As he staggered back, the hero aimed another rapid set of punches at his sternum, causing the demon to growl in pain and anger. This creature did not know when to give up. Though the blows hurt, his bones were in no danger of breaking. The punches were followed up with another instantaneous blast of atomic breath, scalding the demon's hide, but doing nothing more than superficial damage. Nevertheless, the champion was unperturbed. He had once fought Rodan for 12 hours straight, and the far deadlier Hedorah for 8. If this undead abomination had anywhere close to his stamina, of course, it wasn't near its limit yet. It was powerful, but that went without saying. It was a fellow Godzilla, even if bastardized and resurrected. He could smell the stench of death on the creature, and had swum in Tokyo Bay enough time to know that its scent was identical to the one that should have been dead at the bottom of the sea. It wasn't like him, a thinking, feeling creature, but a thing of mindless hatred and rage. It was no better than King Ghidorah, and so it would meet the three-headed monster's fate. The reanimated Godzilla swung its tails at him. Perfect. He caught it and began pivoting on the spot. It was nowhere near the largest or heaviest thing he had ever lifted, but that did not matter right now. He spun and finally tossed his doppelganger through one of the large remaining skyscraper, which then came crashing down on top of him. He'd likely get back up any second now, but Godzilla needed a moment to get ready for something. The demon burst through the rubble and shook its head, looking for all the world like a dog trying to shake off water. It turned and snarled in the direction of its opponent, only for the growl to die in its throat and its pupilless eyes widen in shock as it saw the heroic Godzilla sliding on his tail towards him feet first. 20,000 tons of kaiju struck him at a ludicrous speed, knocking the wind out of him and sending him back into the rubble pile. Bouncing off the impact and landing on his feet, the champion allowed himself a small round of applause from himself before blasting the rubble with his atomic breath. He would kill this abomination if he had to chisel at it all day and night, and every little bit helped. For a minute, nothing stirred as Godzilla lit up the creature's rubble tomb, occasionally stopping to kick boulder-sized chunks onto the pile. When suddenly, the demon burst from its makeshift grave in a cloud of ash and fire, looking like an angry god. Godzilla kicked another chunk of rubble at him, unimpressed, and begged him beckoned for him to come get some. The demon roared and barreled forward at full speed, roaring loudly enough to shatter any remaining glass in the district.